I'm Carrie Gard, and welcome back to Tea Time with Tech Marketing Leaders at our new time, 11 a.m. Eastern. Thank you all for taking your coffee break with me, and to my West Coasters, good morning. Hello. How's everyone doing? It is a glorious Thursday morning. I am very excited for today's conversation. Before I get there, friendly reminder, if you're here with us today, say hello. We are monitoring the comments. This is the beauty. The beauty of being live is that we get to bring you all in and hear from you and be part of the conversation while you have your own sidebar conversations, which I love reading after the show. So get on in here. Let's hash it out. And let's hear from you. Let's hear from you. Today, I had the lovely Zachary Walker. Thank you, Elizabeth Haig, for the amazing introduction to this human. I am stoked to dive in to this conversation. A little bit about Zachary. He is an energetic marketer and public speaker with 10 years of diversified experience in B2C, B2B, nonprofit, hospitality, and fintech spaces. He's an innovative professional committed to overseeing strategic and tactical execution for a brand's social media and digital efforts. Zachary has a proven record of award-winning work, growing consumer reach and engagement via efficient and effective social media advertising. I can't wait to break all that apart. I have so many questions for you, Zachary, but before we get there, hi, how's it going?
Hello, Carrie. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited. And yes, shout out to Elizabeth for getting us connected. She's another amazing human being. So I'm excited to be here and chat all things marketing and tech with you.
Yes, same. That intro that you wrote for me, thank you for that. Thanks for doing my work. I appreciate you. Before we get into our conversation, though, I'd love to know your story. These are all a bunch of, jargony words of things that we do, but like, how'd you get there? So where are you now, and what was your journey along the way?
That's a great question. It's an interesting journey. So currently right now, I am in the advertising space at the Motion Agency. We are a mid-sized agency based here in Chicago. We got our roots traditionally in PR, and we actually just celebrated our 18th anniversary. So big time in the advertising space, where I help lead all things social media and influencer marketing for a wide variety of clients at our agency. So as you kind of mentioned, we're in healthcare, higher education, CPG, hospitality, you name it, events, doing a little bit of everything, helping develop and execute those social media content strategies. Now, how I got here was kind of an interesting story. So back when I was in high school, getting ready for college, I thought I wanted to be a chef, and I was sold. I was like, I'm going to apply to culinary school. I'm going straight in after college or high school. And thankfully, my parents, being the smart parents they were like, it sounds like you're really passionate, but I think you should also spend some time working in the kitchen, see if you really want to do that full time. And then if that's the goal, go to college, go to culinary school afterwards, figure that out. And thankfully, one of my best friends at the time, his dad was a world-renowned chef, and he was kind enough to let me work in his kitchen for a summer. And so I did a lot. Think of the bear, think of that high intensity, kitchen space. And I worked for about 4 months in the kitchen, realized that I did not want to work 13 plus hours a day in the kitchen. And so instead of that high intensity field, I switched to marketing, which is just not a high intensity field. So I actually graduated from college. I started my professional career at a fintech startup here in Chicago, where I was the first hire outside of the 4 co-founders. And I did everything under the marketing umbrella. I actually started as a social media intern, grew my capabilities from blog writing, email, web, paid search, display, you name it. And it was there where I realized I really love marketing. I really love connecting with people, both online and in the real world. But I realized that I didn't really like marketing to banks as much. And what I realized was that life cycle for sales is just so long. And maybe it's me, and I am just jumping from thing to thing and project to project. But it was interesting when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. Everybody I talked to at the time was an entrepreneur, a founder, a startup professional. And everybody told me, whatever you do, do not get into the advertising world. You're not going to like it. It's terrible. Every single complaint you could think of. And thankfully, I didn't listen to it. And I ended up in the advertising world. And I was really fortunate enough to join one of the bigger agencies in the space. And I got to work on a lot of social media campaigns for some really iconic brands like Oscar Mayer, Kool-Aid, I was the voice of Kool-Aid on Twitter for a while. So if you were tweeting at Kool-Aid back in the early 2000s, you probably would have gotten a message from me. And it really clicked when after a campaign that we did for Oscar Mayer called For the Love of Hot Dogs, I had the opportunity to speak at Chicago Social Media Week. And not only was that just like a watershed moment for me where I was like, okay, I know I'm in the right space. I've been able to do really impactful work. I was able to share the stage with the former Kraft Heinz CMO at the time. And people were coming up to me after the talk and asking questions about like, how can they leverage social media for their brands? And so then I was like, okay, this is it. I'm in the space. Now I just need to continue to grow my skill set, learn from others, and hopefully teach others what I've learned. And over the past decade or so, I've really been fortunate to be on both the agency side, helping brands, and then also being on the brand side as well, helping really create and launch social media brands in a wide variety of industries. And, it's been a really fun journey. I've learned a lot. I've been able to share some of those learnings. And it's one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk to you today.
As you were describing what you were doing, the first example that came to mind that's fresh and new that everybody's talking about is Duolingo.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about just a great example of the work. I don't remember the Oscar, the hot dog or the Kool-Aid example because I'm not really. Twitter and I really tried with Twitter. I really put in some effort and I just couldn't figure it out for me. But there are some wonderful brands on there that do some really cool things. And I know that Duolingo is one of those right now that's just crushing it. So hats off to you for figuring out that beast. I can't wait to unpack that with you in a minute. I do want to know for what you're doing now, for where you are, we're all human, life is hard. So what is it for you? What challenge are you currently facing? What's in your way?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges that my team is facing, I'm facing, and our clients are facing, right, is how do our brands or our clients' brands really interact with consumers on social media? I think it's one of those interesting things where people are spending more and more time on these apps, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube. And for whatever reason, it feels like it's more difficult to connect with consumers. And it seems almost counterintuitive. People are on their phone for hours at a time, and yet brands are struggling to build relationships with consumers through social, through content in general. So that's been a big challenge. And for us is really understanding, how do these users behave on those social media platforms? And similar to Duolingo, what role does our client's brand play in that activity? I think that's been something that's been really helpful throughout my career is what is the role of this brand play in consumers' daily lives? And sometimes it's humor, sometimes it's education, sometimes it's keeping people informed on the latest and greatest. I think when brands can figure that out and understand what role they play in their target audience's life, it becomes a little bit easier because then you kind of have that figurative North Star. It's similar with Duolingo, right? Where, they do want to teach people how to speak a different language. But at the end of the day, a lot of their social media content is funny content. It makes you laugh. It's kind of bizarre. You're like, what's going on? What am I seeing this owl doing? So, their end goal, right, is to get users on the platform to learn a new language. But on social media, they're doing that by entertaining people through non-traditional ways of creating content.
Let's talk about the channels. Let's start there because I feel like the world has definitely shifted. When I was working at Publicis Modem in 2008, I was on the YoPlay account. And every October, YoPlay does a campaign around breast cancer awareness. And we had this huge opportunity to do a very cool campaign. And the creative team came up with this idea where we would actually take the media budget and donate it to the cause. So the mission was to spend as little money as possible. Help us spend as little money as possible. We're going to totally grassroots this thing. And their cutting edge thing that they did to do this was to create a Facebook page. That was the thing at the time was a Facebook page, and it totally crushed it. We had multiple tabs people could come interact with. They watched a video of women pledging to making sure that they were going to check themselves for breast cancer early and often. They had a tally, where you could donate. They could actually see how much money was being donated, and then all the share functionality from a grassroots standpoint to really build momentum around this page. It was a huge success, but it was Facebook, and I feel like Facebook is seeing its heyday, and that ship has sailed.
Yes.
So you mentioned three important channels. You mentioned TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say the reason why all of those are incredibly successful is because of video. And I would say even more importantly to what's coming and the shift, even LinkedIn's jumped on this bandwagon of shorts.
Yes.
Is that really like why you're mentioning these three channels and why those three channels are being successful is that particular thing?
That's a great question, Carrie. You know, I think it's a combination of a few things, right? I wish it was a simple answer. I think one, you're absolutely correct that a lot of these major social media platforms are prioritizing short form video content. So think 15-second videos, shorter, definitely under 30 seconds, usually shot vertically. So you get that whole screen, you take up all that digital real estate is what we like to call it. And I think that matches mostly user behavior and consumer behavior where people are looking for bite-sized clips of entertainment, education, information so that they can either keep scrolling, do what they're doing, have another sip of coffee, put the phone down, watch TV, whatever it is. And so I think those major platforms are leaning into that. At the same time, that doesn't mean that people aren't interested in long form video content as well. And I think that's why I love YouTube, because they're in this interesting spot of shorts are being really prioritized. A lot of creators are seeing success and brands are seeing success by even uploading previous content they've created onto YouTube as shorts. But we also know that YouTube is one of the most used search engines on the internet, outside of Google, outside of Bing, outside of DuckDuckGo. Like, people go to YouTube to learn things and to hopefully visualize what they're trying to understand. So, it is one of those things where if you have a entertaining or an informative piece of content, the duration of that video is less important. I'd rather it be a minute and you're going to get my attention for the entire minute than it be 30 seconds and I want to keep scrolling after 15 seconds of it. So I think that's what's really interesting about, short form video content. And that's where a lot of, the platforms you mentioned, Instagram, Reels are huge there. A lot of brands are trying to create more short form video content. TikTok, obviously, that's where a lot of that short form video content, and then shorts on YouTube. And even as LinkedIn, right, they're trying to push more video opportunities, whether it's live, whether it's uploading more longer form content. We've seen a lot of success with our clients and doing almost like a live version or maybe a pre-recorded segment where you're doing a Q&A session, almost similar to this, and you're able to upload that just because people are looking for more education, more in-depth knowledge that sometimes you can't always get on a 15-second video.
I have so many questions. My first question, I know. So here's where my ignorance sort of plays a part, because honestly, I kind of really hate TikTok. Don't throw any rocks at me.
Trust me, none coming from me.
I really struggle with the fast short form. I feel like it's like when my daughter is DJing using my phone. She's in the car and she loves to play music and she loves to be the DJ.
Yep.
The challenge is she switches the song after 10 seconds and
yes.
I'm like in the middle of literally singing and then the song is shifted and my brain is like, what is happening? It drives me up a wall. And I feel like that's what TikTok is for me. It does not compute. So I'm very much more of the long form. And honestly, I think that's why I'm not on any of these channels, because long form to me is more of like the master classes, or I'm happy to listen to a podcast while I'm cooking. But I really struggle with like these channels. So this is going to come from a place of not thinking that people shouldn't be here as brands. I think they absolutely should be. It's going to come from a place of, well, I'm not on there, so I'm sort of struggling with like who is and why should we care. So let's talk about the audience for a minute. We're in the B2B space. For my particular listeners, their brands are generally marketing to what I call a complex audience.
Yep.
A skeptical audience, an audience that has to interact with marketing because they need a thing, and the only way to get it is to go through us, and they're not happy about it. So it's all about that trust building, right? And video is definitely a great way to do that. But where, for those skeptics when they're researching, how does social play a role for people who are more on that, in that more research, deep intention mode versus more of that entertainment, just flicking through that short form?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carrie. I think what's really interesting is even on the B2B side, we're still seeing that trend happen where, for example, one of our clients is a major player in the HVAC space. For heating, ventilation, AC, very traditional B2B where you're working with installers, manufacturers. And what we've seen is this generational shift. So, for example, the new generation of HVAC professionals, right? These folks that are in their mid 20s, early 20s, maybe late 20s, right? They grew up using TikTok as consumers. And so they're just used to being on that platform. So now what you're seeing is you have these B2B professionals that are used to using a tool as a consumer or a platform as a consumer. And now they're finding ways to bring that into their professional life. And so what's really exciting is a lot of our clients in the B2B space are like, how do I play in it? Like, what's my role? And, you're absolutely right. Maybe TikTok is more entertaining. You have more fun, more laughs there. But there are also those individuals that still use TikTok to find information about certain projects, processes, or just really updates overall. So what's been really exciting is that what may have, 5 years ago or 3 years ago, people would have never thought like, should my B2B brand be on TikTok? And now it's like, okay, I think there's a place for us. Maybe we can't allocate enough resources to have a completely separate content strategy. But that's where we come in handy. And it's like thinking about repurposing content, leaning into what we say, like extending the life of a piece of creative. So for example, I'm in the same boat. When reels were prioritized, I don't tell anyone, but I have yet to create a reel on my own channel. Like it's all carousels. I do stories and I capture video and I post that. But an actual reel of like cutting different clips and putting it all together, I haven't done that on my own personal. Now for our clients, I've done it. And what's interesting is that even in that same vein, we find ways to go for our clients like, hey, this video that you posted on Instagram, for example, it's really performing well. It's keeping people engaged. People are asking questions. They're engaged in the comments. So how do we take that magic and maybe put it to TikTok and maybe we tweak a little things. Maybe we change the background music. Maybe we make it a little bit shorter. So I think there's opportunities where even if you're like, I don't have the time to be on TikTok, that's okay. I think where it is important is leaning into what's currently available. And sometimes that's just repurposing content for a different platform. And so even in the B2B space, that's a lot of the suggestions that we've leaned into is, hey, you've got a piece of creative that's really working. See how it lands on a different platform. And it doesn't have to be TikTok. It could be LinkedIn. It could be X. There's a lot of great opportunities to really just expand your overall digital footprint by evaluating what's working and what's not on other channels.
And that's really what needs to happen nowadays, right? Like, it's that surround sound that needs to be created, and your audience needs to see you pretty much in each place. It's not because you're trying to meet them on that one channel that they're in. It's trying to connect with them across channels, and so that your brand, that building that brand recognition, which really comes to my next question, which is around breaking through all this noise. When you have this much content being created, it's no different than me going to Netflix and being like, what am I going to watch today? And then immediately getting overwhelmed and being like, nothing, because I can't decide because there's too many options, and I'll go back to that
Tried and true. Mm-hmm.
tried and true Big Bang Theory or Friends for, like that's just where I end up. So when we're talking about all this content and being on all these channels, how do we break through that noise? Or is it just how the algorithms work and we just got to follow the process and it'll all be okay?
Well, I wish it would all be okay because then I would have a lot more restful nights, I think. But, I think what really I've come to learn and experience is what works now probably won't work a year from now. And what worked a year ago probably doesn't work today. And so it is like any other form of marketing. It is a test and learn opportunity. And so for us, it's, what are those minor tweaks? What are those levers that we can pull that maybe is not overhauling, our entire content strategy, but like, what can we try differently? So for example, could we try going live? Could we show a little bit behind the scenes? Yes, exactly. Right. What are those? It doesn't have to be some well thought out 30-minute long, Instagram live session. It could be 2 minutes where you're just doing a little Q&A and you're letting your audience interact with you in a different way. So I think for us, that's what's been really effective is like, what are those small tweaks that we can do? Maybe it's changing your content strategy up. So for example, on LinkedIn, we've pushed one of our clients in the higher education space to really lean into LinkedIn articles as part of their overall blog content strategy, where they'll create regular blog content on their website, and then we'll take that same content, repurpose it, tweak it for the platform, and then post that on LinkedIn as an article. Just knowing that LinkedIn is trying to push more of that thought leadership content, and sometimes that just means giving a little extra boost in the feed from an algorithm standpoint. It's really, I wish there was a silver ball or, a crystal ball that would tell me exactly what to do. But, for us, it really is being open to test and learn opportunities, see what else is out there in the space, see how brands like Duolingo, for example, are doing things differently. And that doesn't mean that you have to, go that route entirely. When I used to work on Fireball Whiskey at the time, and one of the clients was like, I want us to be like Wendy's. I want us to be snarky on social media. I want us to like jib jab with our audience. And, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Maybe for a brand like Fireball that's already kind of snarky and a little bit edgy, that works. But if you're a brand that is soft and warm and fuzzy, that doesn't really mesh. And so I think where you're seeing is a lot of brands are trying to figure out what works. And sometimes it's a reach, and sometimes it may just have a noticeable impact. But I think another thing that's been really helpful is tying in other strategies that maybe traditional marketing channels are very familiar with. So for example, recently Instagram updated their search capabilities. So, a couple of years ago, if you tapped on a hashtag, it would show you maybe like the top 10 posts that have the most engagements that use that hashtag. Nowadays, if you type in a specific keyword or a hashtag, you're going to get not just the top performing content, you're going to get way more. And that helps not only you as a marketer understand like what type of content should I be creating, what does this audience need, but then also it helps from a discovery standpoint. So if I'm a consumer and I'm looking for, to your point, maybe something highly technical or maybe a little more complex than just a recipe, the ability to search for some of those more complex or technical keywords makes that user experience a lot easier. So if you're a B2B organization, you can still reach that audience that's looking for more complex, more technical information. You just have to use the strategies that are available to meet them.
Let's pull back for a second because I think there's two things you're touching on that I want to hone. One is audience, right? So one key element that I'm seeing on LinkedIn in particular in terms of quote unquote hot takes, my favorite, is this notion of going viral or that you need to have a really big audience and following. And there seems to be a lot of pushback that's now happening, I think, in a good way, finally, with taking the pressure off, I think, of trying to feel like you got to be, have all these numbers to like back you up. Every post has to have 200, plus engagements, and that's starting to like stabilize, I think, in what's reality. And so I feel like while there's a lot of content out there, how the algorithms are curating it for the audience is becoming very, very clear. What's your take when it comes to reaching audience on these platforms? What numbers matter? Are we talking about huge swaths of, visibility? Can we see who's engaging with the content to know that it is the right audience and that doesn't matter? Or do we have to go after, as many eyeballs as possible because we're hoping for that 1% is the right people who are seeing it? So I know that's going to vary channel to channel and what analytics are possible, but just help us if we're looking at YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn, how should we be thinking about these in terms of capturing our true audience?
All good questions, Carrie. I think one, I am a huge proponent of the idea of virality when it comes to content no longer being, I'll hopefully say, the end goal, right? And I think, it is a balancing act and something that we communicate with our clients about pretty regularly where, they'll maybe see a trend, recent times with Charlie XCX and Brat, or Demure if you're on Instagram or X. Those things are trending and they're viral and it gets a lot of conversation. Where you have to thread the needle is, and you kind of alluded to it, is all those additional impressions, all those views, all those engagements, are those really having an impact on your overall business goals and objectives? And really, from a B2B standpoint, is it really getting more people into your marketing funnel? So, for example, if you lean too far into a trend and maybe it goes viral, right? Maybe it's less about your brand or your product or your service, and it's more about the trend. You may get more impressions, you may get more views, you may get more engagements, people may share it. But as a B2B marketer, if I had tell you I'm bringing in 10 million impressions, but the number of landing page visits is the same, or the number of email subscriptions is the same, or the number of subscriptions is the same, is that really a success? And most people will probably say, no, you garnered a bunch of stuff, but it didn't really have an impact on your business. And so I think that's what's really important, is finding that balance between like, okay, it would be great if our content reached a lot more people at scale, but if all they're doing is liking it and moving on, is that really successful? For us, it's how do we get them to click on that link? How do we get them to sign up for the newsletter? How do we get them to stay on the landing page long enough to either learn something about our clients or learn something about the business? And so for me, that's where I try to think about it. Those metrics are great, but at the end of the day, if I'm not driving sales, if I'm not helping out our clients' overall objectives to grow their marketing funnel, I won't say it's fluff, but it's not as impactful. And so, it is a balancing act. I think a lot of marketers are seeing that now, where, okay, it would be cool to be viral. It'd be cool if my tweet ended up in Adweek, or, somebody in my personal life reached out and said, hey, I saw your brand pop up in my feed. That's an awesome feeling. But what's really an awesome feeling is having a noticeable impact on your business and your goals, and be able to go to your leadership team and say, this content strategy has done X, Y, and Z, and here's how it's helped. I think taking that a step further, getting it out of content and thinking about it more holistically as a marketing opportunity, is how do you connect the dots from an ecosystem? And so what we love to do is, with a lot of our clients, we're not just doing their social media content strategy, we're doing their email marketing, we're doing their website, we're doing their blogs. So what I love is that we're able to kind of connect those dots between those different touch points. And as you kind of alluded to, that it's not just how do I meet them on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, it's how do I meet them where they are? And sometimes that's in their inbox. Sometimes it's when they're on YouTube and we serve them an ad through programmatic. We know as marketers, it takes multiple touch points to get a consumer to take an action. So if I'm able to do one touch point on social, one touch point on email, and one touch point through, a display ad, I'm almost halfway there. So, it's really those opportunities where we've seen a lot of success, is like, how do we think about this as an ecosystem and not just like a siloed marketing channel?
100%. I'm with you there. We do something very similar at MKG. We don't do the social organic side. We do the social advertising side.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the shifts that I helped one of our clients make was they were doing a lot of download assets from LinkedIn, which are incredibly expensive, right? Where I was more of like, well, can we look at LinkedIn from the aspect of the fact that we know that it's the exact right people? That is the beauty of LinkedIn.
Yep.
And while LinkedIn prefers people to stay on their platform, it's actually more expensive to keep them there. What would be better is to use the advertising piece and garner them to the website, create retargeting, and then retarget them off of that around the ecosystem with much cheaper cost per clicks, bringing them back to then download or do a trial or whatever, and cultivate it that way, and more of a, to your point, an ecosystem, versus relying on this one place that they are, hoping that maybe they'll do that download that will cost me $500 a download, versus the $20 per click of the right people. I also really love video on LinkedIn from an advertising standpoint. That's been working wonders for us in terms of that brand building. And I really do think, from what you're talking about, Zachary, what I love, and what I also think, if we can think about this from a B2B perspective, is that this is all brand building, folks. It is not lead generation.
Yes.
So one of the metrics I love to look at from a brand building standpoint, whether you're running video ads on LinkedIn, whether you're doing shorts on Instagram, whether you're, whatever that brand building activity, which should be, to your point, the ecosystem. One of the metrics I love to look at is social media, or sorry, SEO impression volume,
Mm-hmm.
right? And has that search volume for your name, branded search, gone up? It's a wonderful, easy metric to look at to see if you turn this thing on, what does that do,
Yep.
right? Are people now looking for you more often? And it really helps separate the two. SEO, bottom of funnel, right? It's not bottom of funnel like
Mm-hmm.
email and nurture is, but it's that next step right before they become a lead.
Yep.
That step right before they become a lead. So if you can build up those impressions based off of this lovely brand building you're doing, then you know that you're making impact further down funnel that then you can then use from an email standpoint. So I love this. I have to say, I find social media, and the reason why I haven't touched it is I find it scary and daunting. So
It
I'd
is.
love for you to help me understand. And I love what you're talking about in terms of like taking one piece of content and slicing and dicing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and to that. But I still find that to build up I even struggle with this in my own LinkedIn profile, right? Like, oh God, I gotta write on LinkedIn again. I gotta keep it going. What am I gonna say today?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it is work to
Yes.
write something that is intentional and thoughtful. Where do you come into play in regards to this piece? Because for me, I will only write if I feel like I have something really thoughtful to say, which means I'm not writing every day. Are you in that camp, or are you in the camp of just get it out there, just be publishing every day, be in the habit, and the posts that are good will land and the posts that aren't, that's okay because you're building that muscle. Like I'm here for both. I think it depends on the person, but
Yep.
like if you were to give that kind of advice to a brand or a person who's trying to build a personal brand, where do you fall in that camp?
And all great questions, Gary. I think for me, I've been both, and so I started in the latter group of just create content, publish as much as you can until it becomes a pain, or you're like, I don't want to do it anymore. And maybe now that I look back at it, I really started that during COVID, and because like a lot of us, we were home, I had way more free time, so I was like, oh, I've got all this extra time. Yeah, too much free time, and so I used to publish weekly content, like not just like here's 500 words, like really in-depth content that dove into specific topics from an overall marketing standpoint. And over the years, I realized that I think that really helped me, one, get into the mindset of like just continuing to write, to be able to put my thoughts down into paper and to publish that out externally. I think that's also another thing too, is sometimes people I talk with, they're like, I don't know if anybody wants to hear what I have to say or what I think. And sometimes just doing the motions gets you over that mental hurdle. So I think that had helped me to begin with. Do I do that now? Absolutely not. Now I'm in the former of like, okay, here's something that's really trending or maybe relevant that I think my audience would want to learn more about. Let me write about that. And now I don't write weekly. I'll probably write maybe once a month. I try to publish maybe more short form content. So like LinkedIn, I'll publish more articles or thought pieces there, and maybe write something a little bit longer on my website. But I also want to kind of connect the dots to what you said just prior to that about like building the brand, and whether that's as a B2B organization or as a personal brand. Consumers want to interact with brands that they know or they feel that they know. And so sometimes having that content that shows who you are as an individual, who you are as an organization, what you stand for, helps connect those dots. And so for me, I think that was really helpful when I started to create not just written content, but social media content. If you look at my Instagram, there's very little about my professional life on there. I want that to be more of a reflection of who I am, versus my LinkedIn, where you'll rarely see anything about my personal life, because I want to be able to share the things that I think are relevant to those audiences. So, you're right. It is daunting. I'll say, for example, if there was a chart I could pull up, the amount of content that I've created over the years has gone down. It would just be straight down and to the right. Like it's gone down. I'm comfortable with it. I recognize that like that's not where I want to spend as much of my time. But that doesn't mean that I'm not in the feed. That doesn't mean I'm not engaging with my audience or engaging with our clients' audiences. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but I think also giving yourself a little bit of grace and recognizing that, there's a lot going on. We're all human beings. We all have different things going on in our lives. And some weeks, some months, it's going to feel like, oh, I could just write for days, or, oh, I could just, knock out this white paper or whatever. And some weeks or some months, it's like, I don't even want to touch my keyboard unless I absolutely have to. And so I think for me, it's been really helpful in just giving myself that grace that, there are going to be some times where I feel really energetic and sometimes I'm not. And I guess that's like most things in life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the struggle is definitely real as a founder. I will say one of the other really interesting topics that's happening on LinkedIn, and we're talking about, we sort of shifted to personal brand, which I think is helpful because as a small company or startup, even a scale up, your founders
Mm-hmm.
are incredibly, they, whether they know it or not or like it or not, they are your first marketing hire, right? And sales, they're
Mm-hmm.
doing both. They're trying to get the word out there in one way or another. Some people go all in on sales and making connections and networking. Some people go all in on marketing and building their brand on LinkedIn. Some people do both.
Mm-hmm.
Where do when you're working with a brand to help them build up that visibility, does personal branding with founders come into play? Or do you generally try and stick more to the brand persona and building that up as the company pages and that realm?
I think, as you continue to scale and grow up, I think that would shift a little bit. So I think to your point, if you're a startup, if you're a solopreneur, really, I'd say up to maybe like 200 people in your organization, individual stories have such a huge impact. And I think, to your point, Kiri, I would much rather hear from the CEO or a founder of a startup of 10 people than maybe the CEO of Coca-Cola. And so, I think like there is that balancing act of like people want to know individuals who like we're storytellers. We love to hear stories. And so even in a professional realm or even in a personal brand, people want to hear those stories. And so I am completely agree with you that if you have an ability to share insights, the people behind the organization, that is so huge. And I think you kind of touched on it, right? Sales, maybe they're focused on sales. I would argue that if you're securing think about it from a startup perspective, a lot of startup, founders came from either a previous startup or maybe they came from the industry that they're in. And that's their story, right? So when they go to sell, my startup role, it was selling financial technology to banks. Uh, a lot of our co-founders were part of the financial institution in one way or another, whether for a card issuer or for a bank or a financial institution. So when they would sell at conferences or when they're on the phone, they're telling their story. I understand your pain points because I used to work at this card issuer. So, I would argue that is storytelling. Maybe it's not a piece of content, but you're the same thing that you're telling to hopefully get a lead to convert is the same story I would want to tell as a piece of social media content or in an email newsletter. So, I think what we're seeing more of now is business leaders, founders, entrepreneurs now recognize that whether you want to or not, people want to hear from you as an individual. And so if you want to stand out, if you want to make those conversations easier down the line, tell your story, be open as much as you want to be. But I think that's a really huge opportunity that more and more business leaders, even in the B2B space, are recognizing that like people want to know who I am and why I started this organization or why I feel so passionate about solving this major issue. Startup life is not easy. Tech life is not easy. So if somebody's willing to put in those hours to deal with those stressful nights, those stressful days, there's a reason. And I think when you're able to learn what that reason is through a piece of content or through a phone call or through, a podcast like this, it really helps humanize a brand. And sometimes that's what gets people to make an action or take an action over your competitor.
I think that's so true. I, one of the reasons why I love working with founders is for that reason, is to help bring them online in a really thoughtful way. And I recognize too that it's not for every founder, and some founders find it really, really tough. So I'm happy, like I'll do ghostwriting essentially, where I'll do the initial writing and then
Mm-hmm.
they'll review it with me and then we'll publish it together. But I think it's really important to meet your founders where they are, and not every founder is going to be okay with this. So how can you coach them through it? Like it's it's you, especially when working with technical founders, like right?
Mhm.
Super scary for them. And so it's up to us as the experts to like hold their hand through that and be really passionate, respectful of
Mhm.
their limitations and what they're comfortable with, because you don't want somebody awkward who's not into it either, right? It's a delicate balancing act. And I do think it's a leg up for any founders who can do it
Mhm.
and want to do it. But I don't think it's a detriment if you don't want to do it. Like, that's okay too.
Mhm.
We'll find another way.
Yep.
There's
It's very
definitely power
strategic.
in it, but like it's okay not to as well, especially if you're technical. So I really appreciate you saying that, Zachary. I think it's helpful to know there is a leg up there, and I think we can also recognize that it's not for everybody.
No, and
It's
that's
not
very
for everybody.
strategic. I think understanding even, as marketers, right, understanding your audience, and in that case, your audience is your co-founders. And so I think it's really smart thinking, right, to be like, hey, I know this individual does not want to be on camera doing a live session talking about, business objectives. They'd rather be talking about product or the latest updates to the app or the platform. But to your point, what if we, instead of getting you in front of a camera, what if we write a piece of long form content? What if we do a blog post, or what if we do a series of, long form written pieces of content? And sometimes for maybe those folks that are more camera shy, or maybe they just don't feel comfortable being in front of the camera, that's another opportunity. So I think that's really smart, Carrie, to understand your audience. And sometimes your audience is your internal one, and recognizing that we all have
Yeah.
different strengths, in opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. In terms of persona, I think this is really key. Some things we've talked about, we've sort of danced around the subject a little bit. I think from a persona standpoint, like as a person, it's easy to bring your personality to the table, right? So when you and I show up, we're gonna get into AI a little bit here because I think it's helpful. But
Mm-hmm.
I have really tried to train ChatGPT
Mm-hmm.
to write my content for me. I have loaded up every single LinkedIn post I've done for the last 6 months to say, this is how I write ChatGPT. This is what it looks like. Here's my long form. Here's my short form. Here's my tone. Here's how I like to show up. And it still cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot. It just does not understand how I write, which is fine. For the brands, and when we're talking about persona, Duolingo being a great example of that. I feel like it is definitely easier on the B2C side to
Mm-hmm.
sort of create an avatar or a personality that goes with it. We talked about Wendy's being a bit snarky. When you're showing up on social, you do want to have a sense of brand tone and how you show up. So how do you go about helping brands identify that personality? I feel, am I wrong in saying that as a brand you kind of need to have a personality when you're showing up on social? I feel like you're saying that. Am I picking up on that?
You are 100%. And I think that applies for all organizations, B2B, B2C, any industry you're thinking about. You need to think about, what does my brand stand for and how do we show up? It's kind of like, what I talked about earlier. What role does my brand or my organization play in our target audience's life? And so whether you're rarely talking with consumers, daily, like in a B2C realm, or you're only talking with them once every 6 months because that's how your business operates, people should understand who your organization is. And one way you like to say it is like, what's your figurative North Star? And, I think we've all heard different ways like to talk about it, like the brand archetypes, like the magician or the explorer, those traditional like thematic ways a brand can show up. Those are great opportunities where you don't have to follow that to the letter, but what you can use that as like as a guiding light. And so, for example, the magician, maybe an easy example would be like Disney. They want to show up and wow you. They want to they want to literally mesmerize you with the ability to make you go like, wow, what a magical experience, right? Now, can a B2B organization do that the same way as Disney can? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that B2B organizations still can't mesmerize or wow their audience through whatever product or service that they're pushing. And so I think that's been really helpful. And I think tying a little bit back to the AI component, I think it's really interesting to see how like even generative AI over the last year, it has been a huge topic from consumer standpoint, from an advertising standpoint, from a marketing standpoint. And despite how much the overall conversation and volume has increased, as you've noted, nobody's cracked the code yet, right? Nobody's been able to go, okay, I can get 100% of my work done or 80% of my work done with AI. And that's kind of how I see it similarly too, right? Where it should be just another part of your toolkit where you can use AI to help you generate content ideas, to maybe help, another good way to think about it is like, if I need to write the same thing 5 times, it's very hard to write the same thing 5 times, but maybe AI can help you and get you maybe 2 ways that you're not thinking about it. And one way that I've really thought about AI in terms of, even in our advertising space and for a B2B client of ours, we were doing a giveaway, and our ECD, or our executive creative director, he brought up a really great example where he's like, I asked ChatGPT, I'm doing a giveaway for this type of organization. What are some fun and exciting giveaway opportunities? And, when he and I talked, he was like, oh, I got maybe 10 suggestions from ChatGPT. He was like, 2 of them were really good. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't think of these. Now, how do I apply those to my brand? A few of them were like, I've already thought of these. The rest of them were like, they're bad. They'll never work. And to your point, I think that's us as marketers recognizing that AI is not up to the point yet where it understands not only our brand, how we communicate, who we are, but also some of those strategic insights. Like AI doesn't understand the complexities of a B2B organization and the challenges they face. Even if you input it, there's no way to know that it's truly taking that into consideration. And so I agree with you. I think it's a tool. It hasn't replaced my work. I don't know if it will replace my work entirely, but for me, I use it as an opportunity to like, am I thinking of everything? Is there something that I'm not privy to? Or maybe there's another way to think about what I'm doing in a different way. And so, I think even from a brand perspective, you can't expect ChatGPT to get your brand tone or your brand voice. But what it can do is maybe get you 50% of the way there. And it's like, okay, it's understanding what I've asked it to do. Now, how do I weave in my brand or my organization to make sure that the content or the messaging resonates with my audience?
I think that's really important. I do think my husband and I were just talking about this yesterday, how it feels like the AI hype is maybe actually toning down now.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's realizing that it's really just a parrot. Like, it really is. It's just taking a lot of information on the internet, paring it down, and regurgitating it to us in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think now that we've all had a play and we've all sort of figured that out on our own, we're now figuring out how to use it. So how I use it for my clients is I always write the content first.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a newsletter for my coaching client, and I always write his newsletter because he has such a particular. He's got such great stories and a great way of saying them that I sort of want to try and capture that as I heard them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll put it through ChatGPT. I've loaded up a lot of his content from the past, and I just say, hey, can you rewrite this? And it changes actually very little. That's what's so fascinating about it, is I was like, yes, I feel like I've captured his tone, because ChatGPT is really not doing a whole lot with it. It's just kind of tidying it up a bit. It's tightening it up. I'm very verbose, so it just sort of like takes out a lot of those fillers and just makes it a little snappier. So that's how I've been using it. Really, really helpful. The other thing I absolutely love, I'm having a whale of a time with Dolly. Like, from an image generation standpoint, when you can like get those prompts dialed in, it is so fun. And creating imagery that I am not an illustrator. No.
Never mind.
No. I'm a photographer by design, because I like take what's already existing in the world and like make pretty pictures of it. But I cannot just take things that out of thin air. Whoop, nope, not me. But Dolly can, and it's awesome.
Yes.
So I'm using it that way as well. And to your point, I'm also using it for idea generators. Like, if I'm going to write a newsletter, but I'm just not quite sure. I did it today. I was like, I need to post about Labor Day and how it relates to executive coaching. Can I just have some thought starters? And I actually didn't use any of them, but in reading their thought starters, it gave me an idea. And then I was able to start from that. So it is just this really great, as remote people, as only children who still cannot delegate, although we're working on it.
We are.
Working on it. It is a nice pairing tool of like a brainstorm partner when you're, on your own. So I love that we're in agreement here. ChatGPT is not coming for our jobs, y'all, especially when it comes to brand building, social media, really being thoughtful about our presence online. Last question for you, Zachary, from a social media standpoint, for all of those like me who find social media very overwhelming and daunting, especially when you have to be on 3 platforms at the same time, like
Mhm.
magic. Um, what advice do you have for us in getting started in a way that does take, you mentioned it, take that lovely piece of content you did for your website and now distribute it? Because what one thing you said, and I want to be very clear on this, is you didn't say just take it from your website, copy and paste it, and put it over there. So do we need to do video? Do we have to get over that hump? Can we do written content? What's your best recommendation to say this is the best way to activate these channels and here's the best way to get started?
Yes. So yes, for the record, do not just copy and paste what's on your website and post it on X or turn that into some sort of LinkedIn post. It is repurposing content with intention and also strategically. So, I think for me, what I try to guide our clients, and even when I'm outside of our office, when I'm just having conversations with marketers, is I would rather be active on 2 social media channels, doing it consistently, than try and be on 5 and struggling or feeling like I'm overwhelmed. It's nobody wins. We as marketers don't love that feeling. Um, the content probably won't be as effective because you're either rushing or you feel like you can't put enough time into it, and then it's not going to resonate with your audience. So, I think start small, be consistent over trying to be everywhere at the same time. I think also too, understanding your capabilities from a resources standpoint and from a bandwidth. So, if you're a startup and you've got 4 people in your organization, for example, would it be great if you could create reels on Instagram? Sure. We also want to be realistic and give ourselves grace. And so it is okay to take static imagery and post that on to Instagram. Now, maybe you could do a carousel where you're using 4 images instead of just 1, where you've got a bunch of text on the screen. Like that to me is a step up from the bare minimum to building out a reel and creating that video. So I think, for example, if you're trying to repurpose your blog content on your website, find that most engaging blog. What has the most landing page views or the website visits? What is keeping people on site the longest? And find ways to repurpose that content. So for example, if you have a blog that's maybe 500 words, turn that into a LinkedIn article. You could do some trimming, maybe make it a little bit punchier, get rid of some of the things that maybe are not as important, and post it on LinkedIn. Another opportunity, speaking about carousels, you could take, some of that same blog. What are the 4 things that I want to communicate to my audience from that blog, and turn that into, a carousel. And really, like, you could put a little bit of text on asset, or we call TOA, and really just put that on there and find opportunities to repurpose that content. I think what's been really effective for us is leaning into the data. And I think that's what's been really exciting too. And it doesn't just have to be blog content. It could be an email newsletter. It could be, for example, if you're doing talks at a conference, if you did a talk at a conference or a panel and somebody's asking you or your co-founders a bunch of questions, use that as a content idea. Your co-founder may have already been talking about it, so they're familiar. Hey, what were those questions that they asked you at the last conference? Can you write those down so that I can then turn that into a blog? The good news is there's a lot of opportunities to just find creative ways to create content, and also know that those are all test and learn opportunities.
I think that's really, really helpful. The last thing I want to say, or last question I want to ask before I close out here, Zachary, is what tools are you using when you're mentioning creating carousels or clipping videos? Is there tools, AI or not AI, that's helping you work a little faster to move that content from a wall of words to something more snackable?
Yeah. Same thing here. There's not one tool that solves all those problems, but I think from a content creation standpoint, Canva is perfectly fine. If you don't need a pro
Love
version,
Canva.
yes, I use it, for some visuals on my website, for other pieces of content to help my clients from an entrepreneurial standpoint. That's been really effective. Don't feel like you need to pay for Canva. Use the free version until you find enough opportunities where you can use the paid version. For example, we talked about a little bit about AI. Later, they have some great educational content. They also have a tool like a caption writer that's AI powered, that allows marketers to use that tool to help with their caption writing or their post copy, their copywriting skills. And then I think lastly too, another great one, you're talking about DALL-E and image generation, Charlie. It's an AI tool. I found out about them maybe about 2 years ago. They are an AI tool that's literally meant for marketers. So helping with image generation, helping with repurposing content. Take this 2,000 word white paper and turn it into a 500 word blog. Image generation, that tool for me, when I saw it, I was like, this is great. It's not to the point yet, as we've talked about, where it's going to replace your marketing team or your marketing lead, but it is so helpful to be able to leverage AI to either help with my content writing skills or from an image generation standpoint. So, I think any of those tools will really help. And then, there's probably plenty that I'm not thinking about, but when you get to that stage where you're able to use, tools like Sprout Social or HubSpot or, any of those platforms where you can get more robust data, you can then use that data to help you better figure out what type of content you want to create moving forward.
So helpful. I could talk with you for hours and days,
Same
Zachary.
here.
Peter is starting to yell at us and giving us a heads up.
Sorry,
It's
Peter.
time to go. Before we go, one last question. Hold on, Peter. Don't start the music. One last question for you, Zachary. You are a human who is more than a marketer. And I want to know, I know that Q4 doesn't technically start till October 1st, but let's be real. September 1st, kids go back to school and it is on.
Yes.
What are you most looking forward to in the last 4 months of 2024?
Oof. Okay. Professionally, I'm very excited to just see how a lot of these marketing trends, like we've talked about, really end out the year, and will those be trends in 2025 moving forward? So what role does AI play? What role do new platforms like Threads, is that going to be something that really everybody starts using in 2025 for a marketing tool? And then personally, for me, I'm really excited to just see how marketing evolves as a whole. I'm a consumer at the end of the day. I engage with brands, both B2B and B2C organizations. And so for me, I just love to see how do these brands, once again, play a role in my life? What information are they giving me? How are they educating me? How are they informing me? And most importantly, how are they entertaining me? And so for me, it's really exciting to see how my work also plays a little bit in my own role as a consumer. And so those are really the big things that I'm looking forward to.
I love it. I want to keep talking, but we are out of time, folks. I have to have Zachary back, and that's just that. We'll bring Elizabeth on. We'll have a powwow.
Yes, please. Would love that. Thank you again for having me on, Carrie. This has been great.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. This episode is brought to you by MKG Marketing, the digital marketing agency that helps complex brands get found via SEO and digital ads. It's hosted by me, Carrie Gard, CEO and co-founder of MKG Marketing. Music mix and mastery done by Snappy. And if you want to be a guest, give me a shout. I'd love to have you on. Let's do it. Thank you again, Zachary.
Thank you.